The First Stone, Chapter 28. Sorry, Frank, Reef said as he climbed into the pickup. He was almost 30 minutes late coming out of the school, and the April air had turned cool. You got the question again, right? Kova asked. Reef nodded. Kova picked out into traffic, then glanced at Reef. Doesn't get any easier, does it? Reef shook his head. Some parts do, he said, but not that one. They rode in silence for a few blocks. A light up ahead turned red, and Kova geared down. He eased the truck up to a stop beside a Mustang convertible. Despite the cool air, the top was down, and two girls sat in the front, bucket seats, laughing and talking above the tortured wail of the stereo. The driver looked over at Reef, said something to her passenger, and they both waved at him and smiled. Then the light turned green, and they were gone. Reef stared ahead as Koval eased into the left lane, waited for oncoming traffic to pass so he could turn. Frank, Reef began. Koval didn't need to look at Reef to know the question on his mind. You know you can't. Why not? Because of the injunction, Koval sighed. We've been through all this before. Reef, if you try to contact her, a judge could rule that you broke the terms of your probation. You know what happened before. Next time you won't be so lucky, and you've come too far to throw it all away now. Traffic passed, and Koval swung left, then straightened out the wheel. It took a moment before Reef realized where they were. Birmingham Avenue, heading west toward the Park Street overpass. He looked up, saw the overpass approaching, saw the chain-link fencing that now made it impossible for anyone to throw objects into traffic below. Because of me, he thought. That's because of me. There were times when it seemed like the events of the day on the overpass had happened to someone else, some other Kennedy Reef who thought that life could be summed up in stupid lessons. Like stuff happens. Stuff didn't just happen. He knew that now. Things got made, and the worst stuff is the things we make for ourselves. He looked up, watched the Park Street overpass slide over them, and grew smaller in the truck's side mirror as they left it behind. He realized left so many things behind during the past year. Some of them he'd worked that hard at leaving, like the anger and fear he'd spoken about to those students today. Some things, though, had just happened. Like friends, one of them was Alex, who'd moved back in with his parents. Last time they'd spoken, Alex had cranked up his Hollywood diva act 5 notches and drawn numerous stares as they'd sat down talking in the food court at Halifax Shopping Center. He told Reef that things at home were absolutely fabulous, honey, but Reef had sensed the opposite was true. Thought of the Robert Frost poem he'd read in English class that week. Thought of the part about home. Home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Reef wondered if that was what home was for Alex. Hoped it wasn't true, but he couldn't get those words out of his head when he and Alex said goodbye for the last time. Others had drifted out of his life too, like Scar, who had always been smarter than any of them and had proven it in January when she had completed her grade 12 at the end of the first semester. On the recommendation of her principal, a guidance counselor in Glen Wooden, she had accepted into business at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She was admitted to courses that were already in session. Although her outstanding performance in her advanced high school courses didn't guarantee her success, everyone was confident she could make the transition. The principal had even managed to get her some scholarships and bursary money, and he'd put her in touch with a friend in Kingston who would offer her a part-time job to help with living expenses. Scar had been embarrassed when she told him the news. It's not like I have to go, guys, she said. I don't even know if I want to. But Bigger hadn't let her finish. You'd better want to, he'd bellowed, grabbing her and tossing her into the air like a 3-year-old. You turn down a chance like this and I'll kick your ass. Jink had been less enthusiastic. You probably won't even want to talk to goons like us anymore, he sulked, but he'd agreed with Bigger that she'd be crazy not to go. And so had Reef. Anything that got her away from her old man was a good thing, and education was the only thing that could ever deliver any of them from the hard-scrabble existence their families had known. So she had gone. They'd seen her off at the train station, the 2 bags like orphans on the crowded platform. Her father, of course, hadn't come, and her mother left the station long before the train did. But Jink and Bigger made so much commotion that the bystanders thought there were 20 people seeing her off. She hugged them all goodbye, including Reef. She didn't kiss him, and he was grateful for that. He was even happier to get her second letter, the one telling about the first guy she'd met in the financial accounting class. If anyone deserved a new life, a decent life, it was Scar. traced his finger slowly over her signature, lingering over the second syllable she'd finally chosen to use. Great to think of her in Ontario, but he'd already gotten used to not seeing her much after starting at his new school in September. The same was true of Jink and Bigger. They called a few times, and he'd gone together with them once in a while, but he was busy trying to keep his marks up and fulfilling the other conditions on his probation, like extracurriculars. Just Thomas was wrong about one thing. He was lousy at track and field, but he surprised himself by turning out to be a better-than-average soccer player and more certainly an excellent volleyball player. He led the volleyball team in points all season, and he'd even scored the tie-breaking end match points that had earned Bonavista Bravehearts the provincial title the previous weekend. The team's picture appeared in the newspaper, and the guys at North Hills made a big deal about it, buying a dozen copies of the paper and putting the picture up everywhere. Reef was pleased, but for another reason too. He hoped that Lisa would see the photo and maybe call to congratulate him, but of course he was just kidding himself. His ability to kick and a volleyball with almost unerring accuracy confounded both his coaches, who had found it difficult to believe he hadn't played either of their sports before. Although he didn't share it with them, Reef attributed his success to the considerable target practice he'd got throwing rocks over the years. Yes, the mechanics of kicking and volleying were different than those involving in throwing, but an instinct for distance and direction was crucial in both sports, and rock throwing too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the object he'd carried with him to each of his presentations. He found it the day before the school started, when Bigger had borrowed his brother's car and driven all four of them out to Crystal Crescent Beach to celebrate the last day of summer vacation. It hadn't turned out to be much of a celebration, though Jink's injuries were still healing, and all that walking over rocks to Santa turned out to be an ordeal for him. To make matters worse, Bigger had decided it would be fun to harass nude sunbathers, and before Reef and Scar could stop him, he'd grabbed some clothes and strewn them all along the beach, only to discover that the clothing belonged to a young swimsuit-wearing family who were playing in the surf. It was a windy day, and had taken the four friends nearly an hour to recover everything. While retrieving a lost sandal, Reef had spotted something near the water's edge, and thought for a moment that he was seeing a single black eye. The stone was almost perfectly round, its edges polished smooth by waves and wind, and it fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. He hefted it, saw in his mind's eye the smooth arc it would make when he launched it out over the waves, and then slipped it into his pocket. The Park Street overpass was still visible in the mirror as he curled his fingers around the stone. The afternoon at Crystal Crescent Beach on the last day of summer. He hadn't known why he'd chosen to keep it. He still didn't know. All that mattered now was that he had it. It was the first stone he'd found since his grandmother had died that he hadn't flung as far as he could. Hadn't wanted to. Hadn't needed to. He held it tight in his hand as he watched the road unfurl toward home.